Hello, everybody. Welcome back for day 2 of our conference. It's so nice to see so many of you back here. And of course, more people are going to be coming in every minute for this event. So I'm George Westerman. I was your host for yesterday. I'll continue to be your host for today. And we have another great day lined up of insights from all angles of this education to workforce gap. So what we want to do with this opening session is just kind of do a little review on yesterday and get ready for what's coming up today. So remember, this conference is supposed to host thought leaders from all parts of the equation to discuss how we can expand and create new opportunities. And certainly yesterday we had an awful lot of great material there and great insights from people on how to make that work. So before I go through what we covered, one of the things I thought I'd ask on this is just let's get 2 viewpoints on this gap, right? We have a lot of educators in the room. We also have a lot of employers and policy people aimed at getting people employed, nonprofits, policy people, employers there. So we'll have 2 polls for you. So let's go ahead and do these 2 quick polls and just get a quick question for where you stand on this question. So Nina, can you pop up that first poll? So this is for educators. So if you're an educator, an educational administrator, a training person, can you just answer this one quickly? As an educator, what's the biggest challenge you see in bridging this gap? Is it knowing what the employers want? Is it getting the real life work experience, the internships, the apprenticeships in there? Is it retaining students all the way through the program, which can be a challenge, right? Or is it finding resources and time to keep your courses up to date, keep them up to what the market needs? These are just 4 possible ways, but if you can choose one and let me know, this is for the educators in the room. Educators, education administrators. And I'm really curious to see what the answer is going to be on this because I have no idea what you're going to say. But in a minute, I'm sure the answers will come up. Okay, let's see how it's going. There we go. Okay, so it's a pretty interesting mix, getting people to stay through the whole degree program. It's a serious challenge. We certainly heard about that yesterday, right? That 2 years is a long time, and especially as you start to get skills, you can go off and get work there. One of the things that we've seen very interesting is this idea of building the certificates into the program, embedding them in the program, because then as you come and go, at least you have good on ramps and off ramps. But this can be a real challenge, and I'm sorry to see it's still there. But the interesting thing to me is how evenly this is split, right? Incorporating the real life work experience is very tricky. That means working with the employers, and employers may or may not be willing or able to make that happen. Interesting also that knowing what the employers want is still, it's a big challenge, right? It's 1/5 of you said that that's the biggest challenge you've got. And so hopefully some of the things that we're talking about here will help on that. Now, finding the resources, yeah, that's a perennial problem. So I'm sorry that you're in that situation, but I totally understand the situation you're in on that one. So let's flip it over now. So, we have a pretty even mix, but there certainly was an attention to knowing what employers want and incorporating real life work experiences, which are very much related to having those relationships with the employers so you can have those conversations, so you can build those real life work experiences. So let's go ahead, Nina, if you can pop up the one, the employers or anybody that works with employers, policy people, nonprofits, people who are in the business of getting these people into jobs. Can you answer a similar set of questions for your situation? As an employer or somebody who works with the employers, what's the biggest challenge you see in working with community colleges? Is it just finding enough graduates? Or is it ensuring that the new graduates are qualified? Is it finding the right courses for your existing employees so they can come through and do the continuous learning? Or is it more that building partnerships rather than just hiring graduates? Now, same thing here. Choose the one that's most important to you. If you're trying to build partnerships and it's hard, that last one would be. If you don't really care about partnerships, it might be one of the others. But just go ahead and if you are an employer or somebody, a policy person, nonprofit, whoever, who works with employers, go ahead and share your challenge on this one. Okay, let's see how the answers are coming out. Finding the right programs for existing employees. I was not expecting that, but that's actually very interesting to see. So finding enough graduates is very interesting. So that would say that you feel like the people that are coming out of community colleges they have the skills that you need, and that's really good to see. Now there is this question, it's 1 out of 6 of you said making sure they're qualified. So that can be tricky, but it's nice to see mostly it's just finding enough of them. But the biggest thing is the right courses for your existing employees. And that's interesting also, as we went through our interviews and our benchmarking, there often can be a degree focus in a lot of these educational institutions. And for and that's not wrong, but the idea of the non-degree programs, making them as important, making them as streamlined, and connecting them as well as they can to employers is an important challenge. So we are seeing that, there are some challenges here. Also interestingly split here, pretty well evenly split, that we can do more on the community college side to build those relationships with the employers, to know what's needed and to get those internship opportunities and those kinds of things. And similarly on the employers, especially it looks like on the incumbent, the continuing education, there's some opportunity there to engage more closely on both sides of this gap to make that more smooth and more ready for the situation. So thank you all for sharing those answers. Now, when we did the poll, so hopefully some of these things that are coming up here yesterday and today are going to help as we think through there. This whole changing face of community college education and how important it was to think through these institutions are not what they were. They are moving, and some of the things we heard in moving was the closer partnerships with employers, closer collaborations among each other, and also just this idea of carving up the curriculum into non-degree courses or into more modular courses that can go. There was a lot of really interesting things going on. Certainly from the education policy standpoint, we heard some great stories. And then we also saw some very interesting things from the cross-industry look. The healthcare employers that are going very well to helping to find their employees and move them up rather than trying to hire from externally. That's good for the employees and the employers. And also just how they're working with community colleges to make sure that their needs are being met. So, and then of course we had the book on the changing nature of workforce learning. So I found it a fascinating day. The fact that you're coming back, I think, means that hopefully you saw it as a fascinating day too. I want to share a couple things here that we are doing at MIT Open Learning that came up in the conversation and that that might be useful for you. Now, as I get ready to share these though, I'd like to give you guys an opportunity and ask you here, can you, as you think through what happened yesterday, what was a key insight, just one key insight that you had? And if you can put it in the chat. And what we typically do is, this is a way of, when we do our executive education or whatever, the first session of the day tends to be think about yesterday and figure out what was a big insight so you can internalize and you can talk about it a little bit more. Now, we're not going to call you into rooms to do that, but let's make this kind of a similar kind of situation. What was a major insight that you saw yesterday? A kind of a takeaway from what it is, and just pop it into the chat if you could. I talked about a couple of takeaways already, but if you can add them in there, it'll be good for us all to hear what you thought there. So as you are doing that, I want to share two things that we are doing at Open Learning that could be useful. So one is the human skills matrix. And this came out of a silly professorish moment that I had at JWell, is we were hearing, we hire for the hard skills, but we fire for the soft skills. We hear we know how to find STEM training, but we don't know how to find the soft skill training. And so I asked the typical professor question, what do we mean by soft skills? What's the definition? And first of all, you don't say soft skills at MIT because we're such hard science here that the minute you say soft skills, people just assume it's not important. And so we call them professional skills, cross transversal skills. We call them all these interesting things. Here at JWell, we call them the human skills. And so what we did after looking and finding 41 separate frameworks of these things, Glenda Stump, Katie Hall, and I put together a project to synthesize what we saw in those 41 frameworks We did interviews to identify things that may or may not be in the framework that should have been there, and then developed it into this model. So if this model is useful for you, feel free to use it there. It certainly has things that came up a lot: creativity, critical thinking, uh, professionalism, things that came up a lot yesterday. But there are also ones that they're not on very many of these frameworks, but they need to be. Things like comfort with ambiguity, integrity, right? Relationship curation actually came up yesterday. So the way to think about this is the top is doing, the bottom is leading, the left is me, the right is others. And so these are organized into how I think, how I interact with others, how I manage myself, how I manage or lead others. So once again, just if this is helpful as you frame up how you think about these human skills, it's out there for you to use. Now, looking at some of the takeaways here, we have units for eventually lifelong learning. Thank you for sharing that, Mary. It is really, really very interesting. So intensive performative and process education needed. Vesna, thank you for that. Yeah, it's got to be much more than just the classroom learning we have. Agile continuous education. Yeah, Bill and I are working with Sanjay and a team on that idea. We want to get there. I had done some studies of how learning and development is happening inside companies. And we're finding out there's a new model where the learning is much more atomized, much more personalized, much more optimized than it's ever been before. And what we're thinking in this world, in the ACE world, is how can we make that work across institutions, not just inside institutions? Okay. Apprenticeship light, good one, Rose. Upskilling existing workforce, this is Bill Bunvillian, into jobs that require more technical skills as a way to solve. So this is, Bill, you're talking, I think, about the what we saw at UPMC and at BIDMC, and how they're giving better career paths to their people, and it's better for them and the company. Professional skills, the whole role of credentials. Can you learn more about which models inform this research? There were 41 of them, Brienne. So, you can Google around, and we can, certainly there are many of them out there, but the ones you would expect to be in there are in there, and we found others too. So we as an advisory committee made up of employers to make sure our training is on track. We don't have any politicians on the committee. Might want to give that a try. That's great. I'll tell Bob and the team about that you decided it'd be good to work with the politicians. It's been great having them on our MassBridge team. The SAIL framework, yes, the SAIL framework's a good one there, Brienne. And effective employer partnerships in design and selective, as well as, so this is an interesting one, right? This is the idea that this is not something the schools can do it by themselves. This is really going to have to be, if you're going to bridge the gap, we need to have people moving across the gap, but people also pulling them across the gap. We're going to need to have the collaboration to make the gap even smaller in the first place. And so this idea that we're doing it together with the employers and the schools, not just either one trying to do it on their own, I think is an interesting point. So thanks, everybody. As before, I was just delighted with the amount that you participated as a large group in your in yesterday. It's a large group listening to panels, but your comments, your questions were fantastic. And once again, thank you for putting in your insights here. Soft skills are very hard to measure and prove, absolutely. And what we're trying to do here now with this is put this out there. And now we're trying to find the best assessments, the best training mechanisms, and just let the world know about those. We're trying to build some role plays, but also there are other wonderful mechanisms already out there. So if you know of any, let me know. And as we start to publicize what we're finding in these areas for training and for assessment, we can definitely share that as part of it. And if you're interested, by the way, our team would love to talk to you. So that's one thing, the human skills matrix. It's just our framework on how you think through these. The other one that Sanjay mentioned it is this idea that we are building a digital credentials consortium. Right now, if you put something on your LinkedIn, there's no guarantee that you actually have that skill or you even have that experience or that degree. And so people call MIT all the time and say, did George graduate from MIT? And usually they did, but the fact they have to call is a problem, right? And as we get to this more atomized education, it's going to be even more tricky. So what we're thinking about is, why not have a situation where if you have completed a course or completed a credential, it goes into a immutable data source, so you can share it with anybody, but the only way it is even there is it's valid. And so then as you share it with people, they can assume it's valid, but they can also validate it. You can control what you share with who, but if it's there, it's real. That puts a lot of clarity on both sides of the labor market organization. And right now, there are some things out there like the SACA credentials. Right now, you can share your credential number and go on the SACA website and look it up. And it says, hey, did George get this or did somebody else get this credential numbered X? So some of those exist. What we're trying to do here in the Digital Credential Consortium, starting with a set of 12 institutions around the world, and then this will become public for anybody to use, is how can we put our transcripts? How can we put our open learning credentials and others in there into something that works across institution? And that becomes now a wallet for everybody to use. And so you see, up here on the screen there, digitalcredentials.mit.edu. And of course, Susan shared a link to the paper also. Thank you, Susan, for doing that. So just to let you know that those are there. So where are we going now? We had that first look yesterday. We have another set of terrific sessions going on today. We're going to start with just manufacturing only. Some really great insights on how they're doing it for advanced manufacturing. We had the other industries earlier, and so we can figure out, how do those lessons apply or differ in the two areas. Coming up from there, we're going to have students in. What's it like to go through these programs? What worked and what didn't? What would you recommend for how to make these programs better to bridge that gap? After that, I'm delighted Celeste Carter from NSF is going to come in and talk about her experience in working with and funding educational institutions to solve some of these problems. And she just has 1,000 fascinating examples of how this has been done very well. She also has some great ideas on what some of the questions that need to be answered are. And last but not least, we'll have a session on statewide collaboration among institutions, among schools and the state, schools and employers to make that happen. So that's where we are coming up today. I hope you can stay with us for the day. I want to thank you for being back for the beginning of it at the very minimum. So let's turn it over to Steve, who can share some more on just the logistics again. So how we're going to get in and out of these sessions.
Great. Thank you and welcome back to the second day of the conference. As we did yesterday, we are recording today, so note that as you're making comments and participating in discussion. If you have any technical issues that you need help with, please do use the chat feature at the bottom. If you'd like to access the English subtitles, they're under the live transcript button or the more button at the bottom of your screen, and you can turn those on there. And if you'd like to ask a formal question of the panels or presenters, you can put those in the Q&A stream by clicking on the Q&A button. You can also upvote other questions for attention by clicking on the thumbs up button. And again, if you have more to share or you have links or other things you'd like to contribute to the conversation, we are still maintaining the Padlet, and that can be found at bit.ly/MIT-MassBridge_Padlet. And that too will be in the chat. It is in the chat now. So again, welcome.
Great. So before we start our first session, there's something I'd like to do that we usually do at the end of the day, but I'd really like to do at the beginning of the day while people are here and still, and still energized, right? Steve, Nina, can you turn on your cameras for a minute? This is the organizing team. Steve and Nina and their team are doing anything technical, anything registration, anything getting back and forth between panels. The fact this goes so smoothly is completely to credit for all the work that they've done in advance and now to make this work. So I want to thank you both for all the hard work you've done to make this thing as smooth as it can be. And Steve Nelson on the other side, Steve has been our content producer. Steve is the one who just was unstoppable at trying to get the very best speakers we could find. Even when I thought, Steve, you're never going to get that person, he managed to get that person to come in. And he's also been working with the panelists and the groups to make sure that everybody's ready from the content side to really share a good story. So I just wanted to make sure that these three people who are really the ones who have just the reason that this program's going as well as it is, I just wanted to make sure you get the recognition. So can we all do kind of a virtual round of applause? Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so now we're ready to start our first panel. So let me turn it over to Craig McAtee, who's the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Advanced Technology Centers. Craig, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, George. And what a great day yesterday was. And I see we're already poised to have another phenomenal day today. Um, the first panel yesterday with the community college all the way through the keynotes with Bill and Sanjay and everything in between was just spot on. Great notes and great collaboration going on. A lot of you might know that if you know me, I spent 25 years in advanced manufacturing. I'm a recovering engineer, as I tell people, but for the last 20 years, I've been in workforce education from a community college in Cleveland called Cuyahoga, all the way through running the National Coalition of Advanced Technology Centers. And, you know, it's really a great opportunity for us to be here together today. I've spent the last year working closely with MIT on the MassBridge project, and we really have synergized on the way. You know, we've got over 170 community colleges in our membership network, but coupled with that, which is spot on with this, we've got over 45 corporate strategic partners, including Siemens. And Gail, I'm so glad you could be with us today and with the other folks today as well. We're going to focus on the four strategic pillars, if you will, of NCATC, and they range from the future of work with emerging trends and technologies in advanced manufacturing and technology, from Industry 3.0 to Industry 4.0 and beyond. And I think some of us will talk about that today. We'll also be talking about work-based learning, everything from internships to full-blown apprenticeships. And complementing that, how can we focus more on what we've heard all day yesterday on competency-based education, coupled with applied learning and really understanding how to couple that with industry recognized credentials where appropriate. And last but certainly not least, we'll touch on a very important topic that weaves through everything: diversity, equity, and inclusion for all of our students and industries alike. And how do we get to a better place for that as we move forward too. So I'm delighted to be part of this. Before I turn it over to the panel and start asking some questions, I just want to have them quickly introduce themselves. And we'll start with Gail.
Good afternoon. I'm Gail Norris. I am with Siemens Industry, responsible for our customer education as well as our educational outreach in regards to our mechatronics program in the US. So I'm really happy to be here and excited to hear all of the insights that we're going to share.
Thanks, Gail, so much for being a partner of NCATC and this great organization today as well. How about you, Tom?
Yes, hello. My name is Tom Fitch. I'm the president of Beat Fog Nozzle in Greenfield, Massachusetts. I'm representing the small employer. I am also involved with the Greenfield Community College and heading up as chairperson for the Future Work Advisory Council, which is a group of businesses that work, come together and partner and help set curriculum and do work for the school. And finally, I've got involvement with Mass Hire and the Manufacturers Roundtable in the local area here. Andrew Baker and the team there does just a tremendous job on that end. So just a pleasure to be here, and I have already learned a ton. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So good to have you with us, and can't wait to dive a little deeper here. But before that, Michael Cook, you and I have run into each other with Fanik and a few others, so glad to see you today, and I can't wait to hear some of your answers today and insights. But please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Craig, and thank you very much for putting such an interesting panel together. I really feel humbled to be with this group of people. So, Michael Cook, I work for Rockwells Automation. I'm director of our global academic organization that actually works and engages directly with high schools, community colleges, and universities across the globe. And really, the core of our mandate is to really bridge that learning, that applied learning from industry into the academic space. So I'm very excited to be here. You know, I've had a lot of history, I guess, with some of your people from MIT, George Westerman in particular, the IoT Talent Consortium, and just very energized by what I think is really happening here. This is really pleased to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. So glad you could be with us as well. And last but not least, Frank from MIT. Would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Frank Field. I'm a senior research engineer at MIT. My research covers a lot of different domains, but why I'm here today is I'm part of the workforce road mapping project that is part of this on this MIT workforce studies that are going on. And so I've been out there trying to learn from some of the kinds of people like on my panel about what it is that are expected to be problems in the future, about what sort of technical needs they're going to be. And so I'm looking forward to hearing their answers myself.
Great, great. Well, without any further ado, we're going to spend about 5 minutes each on a couple key questions we kind of pre-loaded in advance as a study together, and then we're going to ask you along the way, starting now. Please type your questions in the Q&A that you'd like to ask specifically of any one of the panel members today, and we'll get to those as well as we move forward. But let's start with Gail. Ladies first, if you don't mind. What are the Industry 4.0 technologies that you believe will have the most significant transformative impact on key sectors, and when? Are they happening now, or what do you see?
I think there are a number. I think we've seen a number of them come to the forefront, and a lot of this has been driven by COVID. We're really seeing a huge deployment of automation and digitalization demand being driven as a result of the COVID impacts and the need to change what we're doing and how we're doing it. Now that people are on board, the cloud was maybe the first ramification with cyber right after that, cybersecurity, and now coming into edge and virtual. And what does that look like in the environment? I was reading a article today about the skills that we're teaching today are going to be obsolete by 2030 for our kids. So that idea that how are we going to predict those jobs needs? How are we going to train people for them in real time? Because we're not going to have 10 or 15 years to upskill them. It's going to be an immediate need as it rolls out. It's going to be a changing need, and we're going to have agile learners. So some of this is going to be around how we teach people to learn, and how do we make that environment so that it is that growth mindset, that continuous learning environment for all of our cultures, that everybody is seeking new knowledge and driving to that. As we look at AI and data analytics and what all that brings to the forefront, the term, I told my kids that their jobs in the future may be robot wrangling, because we've got to figure out how to manage the AI. AI is forecasted to exceed HI within the next 5 to 10 years. If we don't have the right management of that, how are we going to control it so that we don't end up in a different environment than what we're anticipating? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's really coming to fruition that we've been talking about for 10 years, and it's rapidly deploying, and it's creating new opportunities for a lot of folks and really stymieing a lot of other folks. So I'll go back to, we've got to have agile learners. We've got to have folks that are learning until they're ready to exit the workforce, which may be a lot longer.
I learned something yesterday, I believe, from Sanjay about the term atomizing curriculum, and we talk about chunkable size and modularization. Atomizing was a whole nother level for me, and I love that. So the small bite-sized chunks of knowledge, skills, and abilities, I think in a fast way is what you're talking about, Gail. I'm going to pivot real quick to Michael at Rockwell. Are robots really taking over millions of our jobs as their install base continues to grow? Or what do we need to know about this, Michael?
Robots are creating augmented capabilities for humans. I think that's perhaps the better way to look at it. They perhaps are displacing outdated skill sets. And so there's a migration of skill sets that's necessary to really wrap around how you integrate robotics into automation. And then from earlier discussion, this whole arena of soft skills and adaptability and how humans work with technology and interact with robotics. That's kind of the emerging area of disciplines that we're kind of looking at. And I think Gail mentioned artificial intelligence. As you look at data analytics and additional capabilities around robotics and how we work with them, I think the perspective is more how they augment and bring new capabilities and really displace those dirty jobs that are repetitive and not very pleasant for anybody to do. So the whole arena of collaborative robotics is more the discussion that I think that we're comfortable to have rather than just displacement.
I love it. That makes sense. That makes sense. And what we're seeing out there as well. So Gail, back to you. How will the technician job functions change, do you think, as I4O technologies continue to be adopted? I mean, will existing functions decline or totally disappear, or will they become augmented, like the cobot example that Michael just mentioned? What do you think the new job functions will look like or be required in the next even 2 years, 3 years?
I think Michael stated it nicely. There is an augmentation that is going on. I believe one of the studies, I think it was McKinsey, but I won't swear to it. It could have been Frost and Sullivan, stated that for especially our operators and our maintenance technicians, we were looking at more or less 96, 97% of their jobs could be automated or augmented. And when you look at the augmentation factor, that then goes to that cobot realm that Michael was referring to, where you're really working side by side with the automation, and you've got to have a little higher level of skill set to be able to deal with that.
Back to your, as we call them, employability skills, soft skills, whatever the term is, and of course George brought up the matrix at the beginning, spot on. But even with AI, we're talking about applied philosophy, applied like ethics. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, right? So
exactly.
There's a lot of ethics around artificial intelligence in all kinds of spaces. So that's another piece of that applied employability skills that I think need to be part of the critical thinking and the teamwork and the communications that we all talk about all the time. So good point. Question for both of you or anybody, just chime in on this one. What roles do you think K through 14, high school, middle school, all the way through community college should play in the future of work, Industry 4.0 specifically? Can you define that a little bit? And anybody, just chime in on that, please. We'd love to.
I'll just volunteer. If everybody can come out coding, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
Because that is going to be a basic platform. And I think the other piece of that is, for me, I'll go back to it, that love of learning. Teach them to be curious and really love to learn. And that will stand us in good stead a long time.
Yeah, I think those are very good points, Craig. The digital literacy and the kind of the digital culture and mindset that needs to be developed takes a little longer to be developed. When we look at how these technologies integrate and the complexity, you really want to push the learning down into the school system so that you can actually build on these skill sets as you go. So I think that the push back into the school system and community college system tying in with the school system is going to provide a lot more vitality for us with manufacturing skill sets. So it's very critical, and that ties into the soft skill aspect. They're really the cultural element of working with these technologies, remote access and support, for example, the distributed workforce and how you collaborate. Those are key elements there.
Makes sense. Anybody else want to chime in on this, Frank or Tom, on real quick? Just
go ahead, Tom.
I just wanted to share, Gail, that was very well put. Excellent with the coding piece coming out. The unicorns for us are the players who know how to do the coding, but also work with their hands and bring it to that next level. So while doing the digital is important, we don't want to lose the ability for them to work with their hands and lose that passion as well.
good point.
I think the other dimension of that is that there's this increasing need for this ability to be critical thinking about the ways and what you get when you use these skills, the realization that they're all new and wonderful and they allow you to do lots of interesting things. But there's also this question of, once you've got this skill, how do you think creatively about what you do with it to be a productive member of a workforce, because it's a lot to, there's a lot of our pedagogy always is oriented around always about what's the right way to do things, what's the right answer, and yet the secret of working together has much more to do about what's the right answer for this circumstance and with this condition, and that requires getting a little outside of the standard educational box when you're trying to make use of these tools.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that team teaching and approach to, collaborative, mentoring and all those things that we've seen a lot of great practices across the nation occurring. We just need to really amplify that and scale it up big time so that it's much more like real world working and in a career as you learn. Which is a great segue to like some work-based learning type of things. And I just want to point out that, we've got great folks here in the panel, but I will tell you, in the real world, Siemens and Rockwell Automation compete on a regular basis for some of their products across the globe that run automation. But here they are together, which is wonderful, collaborating on what we need to do better to get our future workforce and current workforce where they need to be, because we're all in this together, right? So thank you for that, and thank you for all that you're doing with education and workforce. I just want to state that. But I'm going to turn to Tom as a small rural community manufacturing company and that you run. Employer engagement in general in education has never been more important to really get to the root of what we need to be training and educating people on versus all the fluff that's come before it. And I'll say that out loud to anybody. But what do you feel are some of the best practices, Tom? I know you're working with Greenfield Community College and some of the things that you've learned along the way from an employer engagement approach with the colleges and high schools. Just if you could share.
Sure. The path that got me here was when the new president, Dr. Solomon Fernandez, gave a call and said, I want to come out and tour your plant. And my first thought was, oh, she's reaching into my pocket. Here we go. But it was a terrific start to discussions that she asked real questions about what was going on within our business today and what was going to be happening here tomorrow. And it developed into further conversations. And then we started the Future Work Advisory Council, where we have local businesses coming together. So the key first thing is the communication is critical and really important, especially to reach in and find more than just the top 2 or 3 large employers in the area, but for the educators who are here, reach out. I didn't contact the school first. They contacted us. We have always had, not always, but in the last 8 years through Mass Hire, they run a program at GCC, which is basically an introductory CNC operator certification program. And what's terrific about that program is they've been over 85% of the students going through that program are getting placed at the end. So it's just fantastic results with that. And the reason that works is for the same reason that I illustrated before. It's communication. It's about the fact that those instructors, as well as the program leaders, are coming out and visiting the plants, talking about what's next and where it goes. We don't have the resources to have our own educational area here. So it's kind of interesting because there is a business 2 doors down and they've gone a different path. And they have a program where they're utilizing their own staff and their own equipment and developing their own training programs, and their advertisements for hiring say, no experience needed, we'll train you up, come in and make that happen. And I've been thinking a lot over the course of the past couple of years, the pros and cons on each of those. Clearly, an organization has to have the space to do it, whereas we're able to leverage the off hours of the local technical school to get it done. And it doesn't leverage the instructors very well. So they're there, they can teach at that point in time, but there is a real issue with finding a sufficient number of teachers, people who have the skill set and the ability to make that happen. So to find ways to be able to utilize that across a larger base, I think is really important. And then finally, I think it can be limiting for an organization if it's doing all its own training internally with people that are within the organization. Where do the fresh ideas come from, and how does that happen? So in that situation, I can see what they're doing. It's working remarkably well for them for the work that's going on, and it's terrific. I applaud them. They're also longer run jobs where we're each of our operators are seeing between 5 and 10 jobs per shift that they are running. We're a much more small batch. So that works really well. And I think the MassHire advanced manufacturing program that we're doing has been tremendous. And I started to listen in on the MassBridge MIT program because where the community college has not done everything we've needed it to do has been in the area of current employees trying to get to that next level. And this gets to be more of a challenge because like the basic learning is much more structured. It's very clear how to teach somebody the basics of G code and how to make that happen. But as we try and bring them to that next level, having a level of flexibility with the educational programs and not requiring everybody, well, I've got to find 20 people and they all have to learn this one thing. In our rural small area, we need to have something that has a bit more hybrid to it, where they can go at their own pace, where people can have some flexibility in the types of things that they're going to be learning, so that they can stay with the passion that they have, as well as bring benefit to the organizations they're a part of. So that's why I'm really excited about what I've been hearing on some of the MassBridge MIT program.
Great, and it's great that a smaller employer compared to the Siemens and the Rockwells of the world has found a way to communicate and collaborate with the colleges and high schools, and that's what we've seen so much success from across the nation. So thanks for sharing some of that with us, Tom, today. And Mike, can we switch over to your involvement with the same kind of thing on a different scale when it comes to apprenticeships and work-based learning that you've worked with some other really good partners as well? Can you share some highlights of that?
Yeah, I think Tom makes a very good point. When you look at the fundamentals of automation and robotics and those things, the community colleges do a really good job. It's once we get into more integrated systems that it's less structured. There's less let's say credibility or consistency around the quality of the learning and the execution of that. And I think that's an area where I think as Rockwell we've looked at that through the lens of how do we get together with other companies and figure out how to create apprenticeship pathways or programs that can allow an employer to actually have a registered or pre-registered or let's say an in-house apprenticeship type of program to enable the development of the employees to get to these integrated systems learning. And at the core of that is the community college that really can act as an anchor point for developing that talent. So we've looked at that through that lens and said, okay, well, let's get together with some of our industrial partners like Fanuc and Anderson House and others and figure out how to create a program that's really defined through the lens of the end user and not solely through the perspective of Rockwell, really to represent what industry is trying to adopt and where they at and what they're trying to do. So from that perspective, we've looked at creating apprenticeship programs that are more adaptable from the employers. If I put myself in your shoes, Tom, from your perspective, where do I go next? And how do I develop the next set of skill sets? And what are those pathways? And then how do those pathways actually align with, for example, the mainstream Massachusetts educational system? And where are the articulation points so that those people don't kind of get lost in some of these programs? And I think, see, Conrad Levy made a point. Hi, Conrad. There's an adaptability piece to this as well. I think Conrad's point was about short bursts of upskilling. An apprenticeship program in its true format can be 144 hours a year. The state can put some definition around that. But from an employer perspective, you might just be looking for the next level of skills, and that could be like a 10-week boot camp over 6 months, 2 evenings a week at community college. And so there's an adaptability that's required, I think, on both the employer side as well as on the community college side as well, that can really enable that.
Spot on, spot on. I would like to just segue into our next topic, and then there's some good comments coming in, and I'm reading them quickly about those internships, co-ops, anything shorter term. Again, anything that we can take the time base off of and make it competency based with skills and knowledge, right? That's where you all want it to be. That's where a lot of the colleges and even high schools are moving, but it's like steering the Titanic. It's a very slow move, but we're making progress, and I appreciate all of you working toward that. But yeah, shorter programs like co-ops and internships. Anybody want to chime in on that real quick before we move on to the competency-based education?
If I may.
Yeah.
So utilizing apprenticeships through the schools and things like that, the employers who are here absolutely take advantage of that. They come in with ideas that we haven't thought of before, as well as the opportunity to have the next generation of players who are available to join our firm. And there was another piece to that, but I'm gonna pause there for right now.
It'll come back to you. It happens to me all the time, so thank you. But here's the deal: we're getting close to we could do this all day. I told the team before we've only got 40 minutes, so a lot of employers are working toward removing degree requirements on job postings. The big IT companies, Google, Apple, et cetera, have already done it, and some smaller ones have. And I'd love to know what your thoughts about it. What we see is those are 20th century milestones. While they're nice to have as we move forward, but the smaller, chunkable, atomized credentials, and especially if they're industry recognized credentials coupled with them, like MSSC or NIMS or SACA that we've talked about already. What are your thoughts about how do we get more there than where we've been, in real world needs of shorter term programs and certifications, if you will, from industry? Anybody?
So I'll just say, we talk about Industry 4.0.
Yeah.
With that, you've also got to think about HR 4.0. And really what the point I'm trying to get across is an alignment between the people in companies that are responsible for hiring, retaining, and mentoring and developing talent, and kind of what are the outcomes and strategies that you're looking for, and bringing those two pieces together. And I think at that point, you can then identify specific skill sets, you can loosen up your requirements, and you can see the role that credentials, such as SACA, micro credentials that are stackable and can look at upskilling. You can look at the shelf life of a 4-year degree and say, well, that person can now go and do a little bit more. And you can start to put actual talent development strategies together that incorporate all these aspects together with all the articulations and zigzag pathways, from high school to 2-year to 4-year to advanced degree. And I think opening up that perspective with an HR organization that actually is closely aligned to business units and those that are dealing with some of the more strategic directional functions of running a business, that's going to be the enabling factor. So I think industry is kind of ready. We're also going through some transformation. And I think that's really going to be what it's about, is looking at the outcomes that are unlocked from an economic perspective for a business by having those skill sets and then comprehending what that means and how to get there.
Yep. And what some of you are probably already working on helping get this policy funding set for short-term Pell. Anything under 600 hours has not been funded by Pell since its inception, and we're fighting with AACC, community colleges, to really get that passed. And it's an uphill battle, but I think it's got some legs, and we have some hope that it will pass soon. But that's for credit-based, short-term programs. Any insights from your perspective, Gail, on how we merge more industry recognized credentials into the colleges and high schools curriculum to make them shorter term and real world from your perspective?
One of the things that Tom brought up, which I'm really passionate about, is that ability to pull on the local colleges and the local schools to do ongoing skilling for your existing employees.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that kind of merger start to take place where we're starting to see the concentricity, and I don't even know if that's the right word, but I'll use it, of the schools partnering with the local employers to really drive those quick flip, what we're calling speed learning agendas that can be 6 weeks, 12 weeks, to take the mechanics and the techs up to that next level. And then they give them a bump in pay, and they've got another 6 or 12 weeks they can go through and get another bump. And it creates that continuous learning environment. It creates a continuously upskilled environment. So you're always moving people through the formation from operators through to role engineer. And it's very viable, but it does require a very close cooperation between those two. So to your point, in regards to those certificate kind of programs, our own mechatronics program is being used in that fashion with several employers out in Western Nevada. And they're sending cohorts through about every 12 weeks to upskill their next team of technicians. And it works. So I think it's there in some instances. We just need to broaden the acceptance of it and have the conversations with the employers. What are you really trying to accomplish? Is it that degree or is it that skill set? And exactly what you said, we're having the competency skill-based conversations now with HR. Love the HR 4.0. And how do we move them in that direction? I think most of our HR organizations are very open to it, but we've got to push that more nimble, agile employee kind of concept to them as part of our strategic workforce plan, because it really changes the roadmap for the future.
Yep. Yeah, I think I'm going to adopt the HR 4.0 because we've already started talking about education 4.0 about 2 years ago. And so and I know, Michael, we're already beyond 4.0, right? We're
way
might
out
as well
there.
call it X.0 because it's never going to stop emerging, right? So,
Correct.
yeah. Frank, can we just give you a quick, what are you seeing and hearing and in existing credentials that technicians will continue to need, and what future credentials do you think will be needed based on what you're knowing and seeing today and other studies?
Well, it's interesting to hear the sort of this congruence of sentiment on credentialing, because certainly I will say that within the communities that we've been talking, which has mostly been the advanced manufacturing firms, the value of credential is sort of, it's a bipolar, it's a very polarizing topic. There are those who feel that credentialing is really important and can be really useful, and there are those who feel that credentialing is at best a poor, a minor signal that indicates that people are that this is a signifier of interest, and that so therefore this is an employee who is game to learn about this, but that a real concern as to whether the actual skill that is needed is going to be yielded when we look at what the credentialing actually has instilled in that. And so this really raises the interesting question about messaging, both about what the credentials provide and also some of the kinds of stories, like hearing Gail describe that what's working and what it takes to make credentialing in either small chunks or large chunks, however that works, how you see a real benefit to it, I think is a message that definitely needs to get out, because there's a lot of people who feel who have, you can definitely get some very strong negative responses on that subject, as thinking of it entirely as a barrier to entry, a hurdle that someone has to overcome before they're considered, rather than thinking of it as one of many possible dimensions that would indicate whether or not you're a likely candidate for a position.
Interesting that you mentioned that hurdle and barrier, because we've got a whole bunch of those, in my opinion, at colleges for entrance, for math and, English and all those things that you need remediated for. So, I mean, we've got no one size fits all, I guess. And the bottom line is we've got to figure out multiple ways to make this happen. And industry's got to be engaged, because that's what we're doing the training for, and the educating is to get a job or upskill your current job, as Gail and Michael just pointed out, which is a huge part of community colleges. So yeah, but that leads into this diversity, equity, and inclusion thing, for second chance citizens and women in manufacturing and applied technologies and black and brown populations in between. I mean, we've got a whole lot of folks that we haven't really addressed properly. Anybody want to chime in on that for the next minute before we go to the Q&A?
Yeah, I think, Craig, this is perhaps more than a minute, but I
know.
Think, we have an opportunity here to deepen industry engagement on helping find some of the occupational skill sets, but also to engage more broadly, not just upskilling or transitioning of veterans. But I think the key gap here is, how do we expand and diversify the STEM talent pipeline? And I think the answer to that mostly lies in the high school space, where we can actually bring some hard-earned skills that will transfer into industry and well-paying jobs, and get young students on a pathway to well-paying jobs in smart manufacturing. And I think that's got to be the key to diversification, is expanding access and opportunities at the high school, and perhaps even at the middle school level, going back to what Gail was saying about coding. This is kind of multi-year stackable learning that takes some time. I think from our perspective, I think that's a big opportunity to converge on this discussion a little bit.
Yep. Well said. Well, I hate to do this, but we've only got a couple minutes before we've got to get turned over to Dr. John Liu on the next panel, which is extremely exciting because it's got students involved, and we want to hear from them as well. But the first question here that came in, while this person, Scott Ryan, can see and understand the need for growth learning mindset, Gail, that's, I think you brought up, he feels that his students and sometimes even himself don't take it to heart. How do we help get them to buy into the importance of this? Any thoughts? Gail?
I'll just say I'm probably the luckiest person on earth, because I had phenomenal teachers growing up and all through school and all through my business career. Mentors, folks that stretched me and grew me in ways I didn't know I could grow. And that's what I think each one of us has to do for our employees. That's what we have to encourage others to do as we mentor and we work with schools. How do we stretch them? How do we make them want to learn more? There's all kinds of ways to do it. And you just got to, in a lot of instances, find their passions so they're vested in it as well.
Well put. The next question I have here from Mr. Najed. Community colleges have a major burden of educating a diverse population of students. Well, we certainly know that. And foundational math and science skills required of being successful in any technical field. See, Frank, I knew I was onto something there. Is putting an additional challenge of teaching students the technical skills, digital skills, and other soft skills desired. How can it be done systematically? Well, if you have that answer, we got it made.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of that comes, right. Answering that question that's a tricky one, but I think the secret there, and I think I've heard a lot of it here in the conversations during this panel, is that it's about motivating the students themselves to understand that the purpose of learning skills is not to be able to say, look, I can extract the square root on paper, or I can, I can code up, loops in Python or whatever. But how does this help me do a job better? What do I get to allow me to be better at doing what I do now? Or how can I make myself a more valuable member of the workforce? And I think that kind of motivation, to Gail's point, is the kind of thing that really sort of gives them a reason to want to put up with some of the tedium of dealing with the remedial work, because it's what's in it for them as well as what's in it for us. And I think that's a really important message.
Yep. Well, we're at that point where we've got to really transition to the next panel, but I can't help but say we could do this for the rest of the afternoon with the industry folks, and you do
Yeah.
bring so much to the table. I tell folks, because I came from industry, as you know, if you're not part of the solution, you are absolutely part of the problem. So get involved. I know all of you are, so thank you for that. And thank you for being with us today and sharing your expertise. And I would just say applied skills and knowledge is the key. We'll answer these other two questions that came in from the back here, but any final comments before we transfer over to the next group?
I'd just like to compliment MIT and the whole kind of MassBridge vision. I think it's so important for us to actually reach out to industry and actually change the perception and also the reality of the great opportunities in smart manufacturing today. So I'm just very appreciative to be here, and to Tom, and to meet Gail and Frank and you, Craig. I appreciate this leadership, and it takes all of us working together to really solve this and continue to compete at the highest level in manufacturing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ditto.
Yeah, thank you very much. From a small company perspective, it's challenging at times to make training and education be a strategic issue. And this really helps to elevate it to that higher strategic level, and the work by MIT and MassBridge to bring that about is very much appreciated. Thank you for putting this together.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Pleasure.
Now we're going to pivot to the student perspective, and Dr. John Liu will be the moderator for that. Again, thank you for everything. We could look forward to talking to you in the future. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.